My name is Emily Johnson. I'm 29 years old from Savannah, Georgia. I work as an elementary school teacher, and if you asked anyone about me, they'd probably say I was too forgiving. That flaw, it defined most of my life, but eventually, it nearly destroyed me. On my wedding day, my own parents called me an embarrassment. They whispered it with smug little smiles, certain I would break. But what they didn't know was that I carried a secret powerful enough to ruin them forever. This isn't just a story about love. It's about betrayal, and the kind of revenge you can never take back. Stories like mine are real, and if you want to hear more, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because the next story, you won't want to miss it. And now I want to know something from you. Which state are you watching this from? Are you in Texas, California, New York, Florida, or maybe somewhere else across the US? Drop your state in the comments below. I'll be reading. I grew up the youngest of three. My parents were strict, traditional, obsessed with appearances. My oldest sister, Claire, was the golden child, perfect grades, Ivy League, a lawyer in Atlanta now. My brother, Mark, was the star athlete, football, scholarships, later a business degree, and me, Emily, the quiet one, the girl who doodled in her notebooks, loved children, and dreamed of teaching. In my family's eyes, that made me the disappointment. Not ambitious enough, not glamorous enough. I still remember my mom sighing once at dinner, "Emily, a teacher? That's sweet, but don't you want something more impressive?" I smiled, swallowed my words, and told myself maybe someday I'd prove them wrong. When I met Jason, my fiancé, I thought maybe that proof had finally arrived. He wasn't rich. He wasn't powerful. He was a carpenter, simple, kind, gentle, the kind of man who built things with his hands and kissed my forehead before work. To me, he was everything my family never understood real, but to them, he was beneath us. A tea family dinners, my father barely spoke to him. My mother whispered things like, "A carpenter? Emily, really?" Even my siblings looked down their noses, but Jason didn't flinch. He just squeezed my hand under the table, smiled that soft smile, and later whisper, "We don't need their approval." I believed him, but deep down, I still longed for my parents to love me, to accept me. On the morning of my wedding, I stood in a lace gown I had saved for months. Jason's family buzzed around me, warm and kind, helping with flowers, braiding hair, laughing gently. But my family? Stone faces. My mom muttered under her breath, "This whole thing looks cheap." My dad shook his head and said, "This isn't a wedding. It's a mistake." And just before I walked down the aisle, I heard it clear as day, my mother's voice. What an embarrassment. The words sank like poison into my chest, but I kept walking. Because what they didn't know was that I had already decided I wouldn't let them ruin me again. Not this time. That night, after the vows, after the cake, after the music faded, I sat alone in the bridal suite for a moment. Tears slid down my cheeks, ruining the last of my makeup, because no matter how much I tried to tell myself I didn't care, it still hurt. It always hurt. To know your own parents despised the life you chose, to feel their laughter louder than your joy, but what they didn't realize was that the girl they thought was weak had been keeping something to herself, because while my parents sat smug in their belief that they had the final word, I held the one truth that could strip them of every ounce of their pride, a truth about them, a secret I had kept buried for years. And on the night of my wedding, I finally decided it was time to set it free the night of my wedding. When the laughter and music faded into silence, I slipped away from the crowd. Jason was still outside with his brothers, helping them load decorations into trucks, but me? I needed air. I needed distance, because the echo of my mother's words and embarrassment kept ringing in my ears. I leaned against the cold brick wall of the church, veil in my hands, tears on my cheeks, and in that moment, a memory came flooding back. One I had buried for years. I was 16, sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to finish homework. That's when I heard it, my father's voice, sharp and panicked. He was on the phone. I told you I'd pay it back. Just give me time. If my wife finds out, no, this can't get out. I remember freezing, my pencil still in my hand. When my mom entered, his voice changed instantly, calm, smooth, practiced, like nothing had happened. I never forgot that crack in his mask. But back then, I was too young, too naive to understand what it meant. As I grew older, I noticed other things. Strange visitors at the house, envelopes shoved quickly into drawers. Once, I saw my mom take off her wedding ring before stepping out late at night. When I asked where she was going, she snapped, "Don't be nosy, Emily." They acted like the perfect couple in public, my father the respectable businessman, my mother the poised socialite. But behind closed doors, I saw shadows, and they always made sure I stayed silent. Because in my family, silence was survival. Sitting there, years later, on my wedding night, it all hit me. The reason they hated Jason. The reason they mocked me for choosing love over appearances. It wasn't just about him. It was about control. They wanted me quiet, dependent, ashamed, because if I ever spoke, if I ever told the truth, I carried their reputation would crumble. Later that night, when Jason and I finally had a moment alone, he noticed my silence. He brushed his thumb against my cheek. "What's wrong, Em?" he asked gently. I hesitated. My voice trembled. They think I embarrassed them tonight. My own parents." Jason's jaw tightened. "Then they don't deserve you." But I shook my head. "No, Jason, you don't understand. They've been hiding something for years, and if I ever let it out, it could destroy them." He stared at me, stunned. "What do you mean?" I whispered. Pause. "My father isn't who people think he is. And my mother, she isn't either." Jason held my hands firmly. "You don't have to fight them, Em. Not if it hurts you." But I shook my head, tears welling in my eyes. "No, I've been silent my whole life. I let them belittle me, control me, laugh at me. But not anymore. They called my wedding an embarrassment. They humiliated me in front of everyone I love, and now I'll humiliate them." That night, after Jason fell asleep, I sat in the dark with my phone glowing in my hands. I typed out a message, short, simple, to someone who had once begged me to keep quiet. "I think it's time we talked about what my parents did." I hesitated, only a second before hitting send, because once I pressed that button, there was no going back. The reply came quicker than I expected. Just 3 words glowed back at me. "Meet me tomorrow." No name, no details, just an address, a small cafe on the edge of town. The next afternoon, I slipped away. Jason thought I was running errands for the house. I didn't tell him the truth. Not yet. The cafe was half empty, the kind of place where time felt slower. And there, in the corner, sat a woman I hadn't seen in years. Her name was Linda Hayes. She used to work as my father's secretary, I remembered her quitting suddenly when I was a teenager. I remembered my father calling her unstable. I remembered my mother saying, "Some people just can't handle real responsibility." But now, as she looked up at me, her eyes told me a different story. We sat in silence for a moment, coffee steaming between us. Finally, she said softly, "I always wondered if you'd come." My throat tightened. "Why me?" Linda leaned closer, her voice low. "Because you're the only one they couldn't control completely. And because you saw things, didn't you? When you were younger." I swallowed hard. I think so. My father, his calls, my mother sneaking out at night. But I never knew what it meant. Linda's face hardened. "It meant fraud, Emily. It meant betrayal. Your father was laundering money through fake accounts. And your mother, she was the one delivering envelopes to keep people quiet." My stomach turned. The shadows I had seen weren't shadows. They were crimes. For a moment, the calf blurred around me. The chatter, the clinking cups, the music, everything faded. I whispered, "You're saying my parents are criminals?" Linda nodded. "They built their reputation on lies, and they used everyone around them to keep it hidden. Even me. When I refused to sign false documents, I lost my job, my career." She paused, her eyes softening. "And they would have done the same to you. Maybe worse." I sat frozen, my fingers trembling around the cup. Linda reached into her bag and slid a folder across the table. "I kept copies. Proof. Back then, I thought maybe someday someone would need them. Looks like that someone is you." I opened it. Inside were account numbers, transaction records, forged signatures, the same patterns I had seen in Daniel's story. But this time, it was my own parents. I whispered, "Why are you giving this to me?" Linda's voice was steady. "Because truth always finds a way out. And if you don't use it, they'll go on hurting people forever." That night, I told Jason. I laid the folder in front of him, my hands shaking. He flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. Finally, he looked at me. "Emily, this could ruin them." Tears welled in my eyes. "They already ruined me. They called my wedding an embarrassment. They've humiliated me my whole life. Maybe it's time they felt what I felt." Jason was quiet for a long moment. Then he placed his hand over mine. "If you do this, there's no going back." I whispered, "Good. I don't want to go back." The next morning, I scanned one page from the folder, an account transfer with my father's forged signature, and I sent it, anonymous, straight to a local journalist's inbox. When I hit send, my heart stopped, because once the truth began to leak, there was no stopping the flood. The article appeared 2 days later, small, almost hidden, buried halfway down the local news site, but the headline was enough to set whispers in motion. "Anonymous source raises questions about Johnson family finances." At first, my parents brushed it off. My father slammed the paper onto the counter, his voice booming. "Baseless gossip. Whoever wrote this will regret it." My mother rolled her eyes, sipping her coffee with that icy calm she wore like armor. "They're jealous, darling. People always come after those who shine too bright." But I noticed the flicker in their eyes, a shadow of fear. Because they knew the truth wasn't gossip, it was evidence. In Savannah, reputation was currency. My parents had spent decades curating their charity galas, church donations, polished smiles at every town event. So when the whispers started, they spread like wildfire. At the grocery store, I overheard 2 women by the produce aisle. "Did you see the article?" The Johnsons' money laundering, can you imagine? The other shook her head. I always thought they were too perfect. At school, a fellow teacher leaned close and whispered, Emily, is that your family they're talking about? I smiled, faintly. Yes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt powerful. That Sunday at church, my parents still walked in as if nothing had changed. My father in his crisp suit, my mother in her pearls, but the air was different. People didn't flock to them. They whispered behind hymn books. When the service ended, I watched from the back pew as my mother's smile faltered. Her grip on my father's arm tightened just a little too much. They felt it. The isolation, the beginning of exile. That night, I opened Linda's folder again. This time, I chose something bigger, a document tying my father's business account to a shell company registered in my mother's maiden name. I scanned it, and with one click, I sent it to 3 journalists instead of 1. The second article didn't bury itself. It screamed across headlines. Businessman Robert Johnson linked to suspicious accounts. My phone buzzed nonstop. Colleagues, neighbors, even old classmates, but the best moment came when my sister Claire called. Her voice was sharp, furious. Emily, what the hell is going on with Mom and Dad? People at the firm are whispering, do you know how humiliating this is for me? I let my voice tremble, soft. I don't know, Claire. Maybe their perfect image wasn't so perfect after all. And I hung up. That evening, my parents showed up at my house unannounced. My mother's heels clicked against the hardwood, her perfume too sharp. She didn't even sit before hissing, what have you done? I widened my eyes innocently. Me? Nothing. My father's face was red, veins straining in his neck. You don't understand what's at stake here, Emily. This family's name, my name, means everything. I met his glare with calm I never thought I had. Maybe it shouldn't. That night, as they left, I watched from the window. My father's confident stride was gone. My mother's head was bowed, her shoulders tense, and in that moment I realized something. They weren't angry anymore. They were afraid, and fear was only the beginning. The Johnsons used to be untouchable. Every weekend meant charity luncheons, cocktail parties, golf outings. They lived for the spotlight, but after the second article, the spotlight turned harsh, and their friends began to scatter. A month earlier, my parents had been invited to host a fundraiser at the Savannah Country Club. They loved those nights, cameras flashing, hands shaking, their names printed in glossy programs. But this time, things were different. I stood at the back of the ballroom, my hand looped through Jason's arm, just to watch. When my parents arrived, dressed to perfection, I saw the shift immediately. Whispers, side glances, polite smiles that didn't reach the eyes. One couple actually turned away before greeting them. My mother's smile didn't break, but I saw her knuckles whiten around her clutch. During the opening speech, my father took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice booming with forced confidence. Our family has always believed in integrity. A cough cut through the room. Then a murmur, integrity? Someone whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear. The crowd chuckled. My father froze, just for a second, then forced a laugh, and pressed on. But the damage was done. For the first time, the mighty Robert Johnson was laughed at, and I watched, my lips pressed tight to keep from smiling. That night, my sister Claire called again. Her voice was sharp, panicked. Do you realize what this is doing to my career? People are questioning me now, Emily. Do you even care? I said softly, I cared when they humiliated me. Did you? She went silent, then hung up. Linda had warned me. Drop the truth slowly. Let them sweat. So I did. Another document, this one a signed check from my mother to a consultant linked to shell companies. I scanned it, sent it, watched the ripple spread. The next headline was bigger than all the rest. Johnson family under investigation. Community leaders questioned their integrity. Within days, invitations stopped. No more parties. No more luncheons. A tea church. No one sat beside them anymore. At the market, old friends suddenly turned the other way. For people like my parents, exile was worse than prison because it meant invisibility, and still, they tried to act as if nothing was wrong. Still, they clung to their pride, but pride doesn't shield you when the world sees the cracks. That week, they showed up at my door again. My father slammed his fist on the table. You think this is funny, Emily? You think tearing us down makes you stronger? I met his rage with calm. I think telling the truth makes me free. My mother's voice broke, sharp, trembling. You'll ruin us. Do you understand? You'll ruin this family. I stared at her, steady. You already did that yourselves. As they left, my mother turned at the door. Her voice was a whisper, but sharp as a blade. If you keep this up, Emily, you'll regret it. I smiled faintly. Funny. That's exactly what I thought on my wedding day. And as the door closed behind them, I knew the war wasn't just about whispers anymore. It was about survival. The first knock on their door came on a Tuesday morning. Investigators, not police, not yet, but men in suits with badges clipped to their belts. Neighbors saw. And in a town like Savannah, that was enough. They asked questions. They took files. They left business cards behind. By noon, the whispers had sharpened into certainty. The Johnsons weren't just rumors anymore. They were under investigation. I heard it in the teacher's lounge at work. Did you hear? Emily's parents. Fraud. Imagine, someone else whispered all those years, pretending they were better than everyone else. I didn't correct them. I just sipped my coffee and let it burn sweet in my throat. That night, Jason and I drove past my parents' house. The lights were on, but the curtains drawn tight. For the first time, it looked small, fragile. Inside, I knew the storm was raging. My father pacing, my mother crying quietly in the kitchen, the proud Johnsons reduced to shadows in their own home. The following Sunday, they still went to church. Habit, pride, maybe denial, but this time, no one even pretended. As they walked down the aisle, whispers followed them like a trail of fire. I sat in the back pew, Jason's hand wrapped around mine, and I watched as my father's shoulders stiffened. My mother's smile cracked when the pastor began the sermon on truth and humility. People's eyes turned to them, and for the first time in their lives, they looked ashamed. I went home that afternoon and opened the folder one last time. The biggest piece, the one Linda had warned me about, could end everything. A contract, my father's signature, my mother's, too. Clear evidence of money laundering through a charity fund, the same charity they had paraded around for years, the same one they had used to win applause. I scanned it, sent it, and waited. The headline exploded across town. Johnson family accused of defrauding local charity. There were no whispers now, just disgust. Old friends turned their backs. Church members demanded answers. Even my siblings Claire and Mark stopped defending them. Claire called me, voice shaking. They're finished, Emily. Do you understand? Finished. I said quietly, "Good," and I hung up. That night, my parents came one last time. No pretense. No anger left, only desperation. My father's voice trembled. "Emily, you don't know what you've done. We could lose everything." I looked at him, steady. "You already did. The day you chose lies over family." My mother's eyes glistened with tears. "Why, Emily? Why would you do this to us?" I whispered, calm. "Because on my wedding day, you called me an embarrassment." But the truth, you were the embarrassment. All along, as they left, I saw something I'd never seen before. My father's hands are shaking. My mother's shoulders slumped, the mighty Johnsons. Broken, but broken people are dangerous. And I knew before the end, they would try to strike back. And I was ready. When predators are cornered, they don't surrender. They bare their teeth, and my parents, Robert and Linda Johnson, were no different. A week after the charity scandal broke, they called a press conference. Cameras flashed outside their home. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. My father stood tall in his best suit, my mother at his side in pearls and a forced smile. He cleared his throat and said, "These baseless accusations are nothing more than lies designed to tarnish the name of a family who has done nothing but serve this community." He gestured toward my mother. "We have always believed in integrity, faith, and giving back. These attacks will not break us." But as the words left his lips, a reporter shouted from the crowd, "Mr. Johnson, do you deny signing the documents tied to the charity fraud?" My father froze, just for a moment, then forced a laugh. "Fabrications. Completely fabricated," but I saw it. The twitch in his jaw, the sweat at his temple. The crowd saw it too. That night, Claire called me again, furious. "Do you know how pathetic they looked up there? Everyone at my firm is whispering about me now. Do you realize what you've done?" Her voice cracked, something I'd never heard before. "They're our parents, Emily. You've destroyed them." I whispered back, calm. "No, they destroyed themselves. I just stopped covering for them." She hung up without another word. Within days, invitations that still lingered dried up completely. The church pastor issued a statement distancing himself from unethical behavior. Local businesses pulled sponsorships from charities my parents had once chaired. Their world built on illusion was collapsing in public, and still, they fought. One evening, as Jason and I finished dinner, there was a sharp knock at our door. My father stood there, red-faced, shaking. My mother lingered behind him, her eyes wild. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "You," he hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You're behind this, all of it, aren't you?" I said nothing. Jason stood ready, but I lifted my hand to stop him. My mother's voice broke, trembling. "Emily, if you don't stop this, if you don't stay quiet, do you know what will happen? We could lose the house, the cars, everything." I looked at her, my voice cold. "Maybe you should have thought of that before you stole from the people you pretended to serve." For the first time in my life, they had no comeback. My father's lips trembled, but no words came. My mother's shoulders sagged. The silence was heavy. Finally, I whispered, "You tried to control me my whole life, but you don't control me anymore, and you never will again." They left without another word, but as the door closed, I caught one last look in my father's eyes, not anger, not pride, desperation, and desperate people make reckless choices. I knew then that their fight wasn't over. Their last defense hadn't been a surrender. It was a warning. Reputation is fragile. One crack becomes a fracture, and one fracture becomes rubble. By the time the third article dropped, there was no saving face. Johnson family charity fraud under federal review, not local anymore. Not whispers. This was everywhere: radio, TV, online feeds. Neighbors didn't whisper behind curtains anymore. They spoke openly on porches, in parking lots, at church doors. The Johnsons were no longer untouchable. They were the scandal. Claire and Mark turned on them first. Mark called me furious. Do you realize I can't even walk into the gym without people looking at me? This is humiliating. I asked quietly, humiliating for you or for them? Silence. Then the line went dead. Claire wasn't any calmer. She stormed into my house, her voice breaking. Do you understand what you've done? They'll lose everything. I looked at her, steady. They taught us everything was about appearances, Claire. Maybe now we'll learn who they are without the mask. She glared at me, but tears glistened in her eyes. I drove past their house one evening. The yard, once pristine, was overgrown. The porch light flickered. Inside, through the sheer curtains, I saw my mother sitting at the dining table, shoulders hunched, staring at nothing. My father paced behind her, phone pressed to his ear, his voice raised and desperate. The image of power was gone. All that remained were two broken people trapped in a cage of their own making. At the next charity event, the very one my parents once ruled, they weren't even invited. But I went. I walked in with Jason at my side, my hand resting gently on his arm, and as people greeted me, asked about my work, complimented my grace, I felt it. The shift. For the first time, I was the Johnson people respected, not because of money, not because of lies, but because I had survived them. The federal review turned into official charges. The headline this time was brutal. Robert and Linda Johnson face potential indictment. There was no denying it now. No excuses, no baseless lies. They were finished. One afternoon, I walked downtown and saw it with my own eyes. My parents, once the royalty of Savannah, were cornered by reporters outside the courthouse. Microphones shoved toward their faces. Questions shouted, Mrs. Johnson, do you deny the accusations? Mr. Johnson, how much money did you take? My mother's face was pale, makeup running under the heat. My father's voice cracked as he barked, no comment, and the crowd laughed. Actually laughed, the same laughter they once reserved for me. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my own reflection. I had done it. Their empire was ashes, their pride, their name, their power gone, but deep inside, I knew it wasn't finished. Because revenge doesn't end with whispers or headlines. It ends when you look at the people who broke you in the eyes and deliver the final blow. And I was ready. The summons came on a gray Thursday morning. A court date, formal charges, fraud, forgery, misuse of charity funds. The Johnsons, the couple who once stood above everyone else in Savannah, were about to stand trial. My mother called me that night. Her voice was trembling, stripped of its usual polish. Emily, please, don't let it end like this. You're our daughter. You can fix this. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of every cruel word, every dismissal, every time. They had made me feel small, and then I whispered, steady, you called my wedding an embarrassment. You called me an embarrassment, but the truth, you were the embarrassment all along. She sobbed softly before hanging up. The courthouse was packed the morning of the hearing. Reporters lined the steps, cameras flashing. Neighbors, acquaintances, old friends, they all came to watch the fall. Jason held my hand as we walked inside. But this time, I didn't feel nervous. I felt calm. My parents sat at the defense table, looking smaller than I had ever seen them. My father's suit hung loose on his frame. My mother's pearls trembled against her collarbone. When the charges were read aloud, their heads dropped, the whispers rippled through the gallery. Claire sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, her face pale, lips tight. Mark didn't even show up. The Golden family fractured into silence and shame. And me? I sat tall. For once, I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I was the truth teller. When the hearing ended, I walked past them slowly. My heels echoed on the courthouse floor. My father looked up at me, his eyes wild, desperate. "You'll regret this, Emily. Do you hear me? You'll regret it." I stopped, met his stare, and said calmly, "No, Dad. The only thing I regret is staying silent for so long." My mother reached out, her fingers trembling as if to touch my hand. But I pulled back. I whispered, "You taught me silence, but now I'm teaching you the truth." And I walked away. Outside, the cameras flashed, microphones thrust toward me. "Emily, do you have a comment?" I paused on the courthouse steps, the fall sunlight warm against my face. For a long moment, I said nothing. Just let the silence speak. For me, because sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's power, and in that silence, my parents' empire finally crumbled. The courthouse emptied slowly that day. Reporters drifted away. Neighbors whispered as they climbed into their cars. And me? I stayed behind for a moment, standing on the steps, staring at the sky. It was pale blue, quiet, almost gentle. In the weeks that followed, everything shifted. My parents were indicted, their assets frozen, their names dragged through headlines. They could no longer control. The house they once bragged about went up for sale. The charities they once ruled cut all ties. Their friends disappeared like smoke. For decades, they had lived for pride, for image, for applause. And in the end, all they had left was silence. Claire stopped calling. Mark vanished into his own life. The Golden family was gone. Sometimes I drove past my parents' house empty now, the windows boarded, the yard overgrown. I would park down the street and stare, and I will remember my mother's words on my wedding day and embarrassment. How small those words seemed now. One evening, Jason and I sat on the porch, the crickets humming in the dark. He asked softly, "Do you feel better?" After all this, I thought about it, about the tears, the shame, the weight of years spent in silence, and I said quietly, "No, not better. Just free." Jason took my hand, kissed my fingers gently, and in that moment, I realized something. Revenge doesn't heal you. It doesn't erase scars. It doesn't rebuild what was lost, but it clears the air. It tears down the walls built to cage you, and it leaves behind space for something new. The last time I saw my parents, they were in court again, their heads down, their bodies smaller than I remembered. They didn't look at me, and I didn't speak because there was nothing left to say. They had called me an embarrassment. But now, the whole world saw the truth. So here I sit, telling you this in the quiet dark. I didn't forgive them. I don't need to. Forgiveness is for people who still carry love. And me? All I carry now is freedom. And maybe that's enough.